Okay, so we're talking about speculative narratives. We're talking about the serious, heavyweight, dystopian, utopian, end of the world, life has gone real effed up stuff. Well, we're talking about any novel, TV show, or film which speculates the big question on everyone's lips: what if? And 9 times out of 10, their foundations are built upon the cultural and societal context at the time of their writing, filming, or publishing. Some speculative narratives you may be familiar with include The Hunger Games, The Maze Runner, The Fifth Wave, V for Vendetta, and The Handmaid's Tale. At least if you're not familiar with the last two, you can go check out my blog. But today, however, we're looking at the movie I Am Legend, which was made back in 2007, starring Will Smith and some other people you may not be so familiar with. Okay, so basically the story of the film is that a woman called Alice created a cure for cancer which was supposedly safe. Fast forward a few years, and what is called the KV virus has mutated from its original chemistry, becoming both an airborne and contact disease. Its effects are devastating, killing hundreds and turning just as many into what you'd pretty much imagine zombies to be, except they're fast and will eat all of you, not just your brain. In the middle of all this chaos is a scientist and ex-soldier called Robert Neville and his cute little canine companion Samantha, trying to find a potential cure to the virus by using the immunity which is found within his blood. Now, here I'm sorry for a little bit of the spoilers, but you can't help that. Neville tries to reach out to any survivors by broadcasting a message over radio channels, and during this time he finds another potential cure. It, however, after another human trial, is found to be an absolute failure. Later, Neville is trapped and Samantha becomes infected. Ultimately, Neville tries to save her with the serum, but ends up having to strangle her to death on the basement floor. Following this, Neville goes a bit bonkers and does some pretty irrational things in which he winds up in a very bad situation. It's at this point that a survivor who has been listening to his radio signals shows up and rescues him. In the end, however, the infected follow them back to the apartment and launch a full attack. In this attack, basically everyone dies. Well, not everyone. Neville blows up himself and the infected, leaving a vial of the potential cure with the survivors to take to the survivor camp. The end. Okay, so now that we've looked into the brief synopsis of what I Am Legend is, we can look into the fundamentals of why this is considered a speculative narrative. So ultimately, this means that we need to actually look into the initial story which I Am Legend is built upon, which is the 1954 novel written by Richard Matheson of the same title. Okay, so basically before we go too far into the context, I want to highlight some similarities and differences between the film and the 1954 novel. So basically, in terms of similarities, we have the same protagonist called Robert Neville, and he is immune to it. The disease is still a pandemic, and it has similar characteristics to vampirism and zombieism. Basically, both protagonists from both the film and the novel make it a part of their life to find the cure, and both find solace in a dog until it becomes infected and dies. So within the novel, we have the setting is Los Angeles, and ultimately the disease was caused by war and was spread by dust and a growing mosquito population. In terms of our character, the disease claimed most of his family and forced him to kill his own wives. And a bit stereotypical here, he protects himself through the use of crucifixes, garlic, and all that sort of jazz. But in the novel, however, there's 2 sets of dead people. There's the dead infected, which are literally just your vampires. And then you've got the living infected who have moved past being, these sick and monsters, and they're trying to move on and trying to create a new civilization. The living infected ultimately kill our main protagonist out of fear of him threatening their new race. And the film doesn't really vary much, except the setting has changed. Instead, it's set in New York, and instead of the disease being caused by war, it is actually trying to be a potential cure for cancer. And unlike what it says in the novel of how our main protagonist dies, Robert Neville in the film dies trying to save Anna and her son, who are the survivors that come in and save him after he's done some really stupid stuff. Okay, now I'd really like to move on to the context before I wrap this all up. So now after looking at these contexts, you're probably really wondering how they actually link to our texts. Well, in terms of our film, it's a little bit far-fetched. However, the concept of a cure for cancer through the manipulation of other diseases becomes somewhat a bit more realistic when we look at the context of the 2000s, which is greatly noted for the rise in disease originating from third world countries. This, however, is very broad, but brings itself into consideration. However, in terms of our novel, the biggest thing that we can draw upon is the rise in the polio epidemic before, during, and after World War II. This is adapted into the novel as the disease was caused by war and continued to spread after it in other forms. So finally, the last question that you may have in mind after looking at all these contexts and similarities is, what is the purpose of I Am Legend as a speculative narrative? Well, ultimately, it foreshadows the potential consequences of human ignorance. In this case, the experimentation of potentially deadly viruses which we don't have a full understanding of. In any case, the results of such ignorance is devastating and is well demonstrated within I Am Legend. So, lastly, a big thank you for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it.